So we've already talked about what cisgender is and what transgender is a little bit. Transgender is usually an umbrella category, but not everyone that doesn't identify as cisgender falls under transgender umbrella. They may have a different gender identity, but they don't feel like they're trans. The transgender community, it's very complicated. Gender communities in general are pretty complicated. The importance of labels is to find people that you can connect with, that understand what you're going through, and to know you're not alone and you're not a freak. And that's really important. That's the main thing about labels. If labels don't help you, don't use them. You define your labels. So I'm going to talk about different gender labels, and it's different categories. It's not a spectrum. I always hear that gender is a spectrum, but it's really not. There's so many different categories, and it's so difficult to figure out how they fit together. It's not a straight line from male to female and everything in between. It's not. So there is more masculine people and different levels of masculinity and different levels of femininity, but that's not gender. That's more gender presentation or your behavior. And again, this is based on gender rules that are arbitrary and depend a lot on your culture. Every culture is different. Every gender rule is different. So you can't really control identity with those arbitrary made-up things based on your culture. So all of these are different separate identities. Of course, there's the main two, man and woman. And this includes trans men and cis men, trans women and cis women. They're just men and women. There's no differentiation. That's how they identify. Their sex, their genitals, none of that matters. They're just men and women. Treat them like that. So then we have, let's see if I can find my, yes, okay. So we have non-binary identities, which can comprise of a lot of different identities. I'm going to go through different ones and explain them. I might not get all of them because there are a lot of identities. If there's any identity that I missed, comment below what it is and a little definition, just so people know that it exists. There's every kind of combination of gender out there, and everyone experiences that gender differently. So it's difficult to say, hey, this is what genderqueer is. Everyone who is genderqueer experiences this. Gender's different for everyone. There's no rules. So there's intergender, which is someone who feels like they're both male and female, or they're a combination of those. It's intergender. There's bigender, which is a person who feels that they're both male and female, or both two genders. And one day they may feel more like one day they may feel more like the other. Androgyny, that's a person who, it's not just being androgynous, which is kind of an ambiguous gender, but gender presentation, I guess, but it's more like a different gender, where you want, most non-binaries feel like they want to be androgynous. They want people to question their gender and not be able to figure out their designated sex. But an androgyny person takes it to the next level, where that's their identity as well. Genderqueer, that's what I am. Some days I feel more like a man, some days I feel more like a woman. Most of the time, I feel like I'm something else altogether. And every genderqueer person feels differently, but that's the gist of it. It's something other than male and female, but it has combinations of both. Third gender people feel like they're a different gender, and we'll get into more third gender categories in a second. There's gender fluid people, and that's people who feel like their gender changes. And I think that gender in general is fluid. There's a lot of people who one day feels more masculine, the other day feels more feminine. Gender fluidity is a thing all by itself, but there's also people where that's their entire identity is gender fluid. There's also multigender, where they feel that where they feel like they have many genders, and some days they may be one more gender than the other. There's polygender, they feel like they have all the genders, and they may be more one gender one day. Or wait, polygender is many genders. Oh, see, I get them confused too. Polygender is many genders, kind of like multigender. Pangender is all the genders, which I should know since I'm pansexual, and I like all the peoples. But anyway, pangender, all the genders. Queer is an umbrella term, and that pretty much anything that is not cis man, cis woman, you can just have a queer gender, and that can be your identity, which is different than being gender queer. But it can be an umbrella term for any of those identities, or it can be an identity all on its own. And then there's gender neutral identities, which includes gender neutral, obviously, a person who feels like they're neither male or female, that they have a neutral gender. They might not necessarily have a gender. There's agender, which is when someone does not have a gender. They just feel like they're genderless. There's neutrois. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might get some pronunciations wrong. But neutrois, and that's again where you don't feel like you have a gender. You're genderless. And even for cis people, gender is different. So whenever you take on all of these different identities, everyone is different and everyone identifies in a different way. You can change and be fluid, you can have different qualities. It's any combination. Like we talked about before, that gender is comprised of the way you dress, the way you act, the way you want people to see you. You can have any combination of any of those things, and everyone is different. Your identity is however you define it. You may not fit into one category, and you may fit into none of the categories that I've talked about. These identities just help to serve you to find people who feel the same as you and to find a helpful community, because you might not have a community at home, people that understand you. So you can go online and find a certain community and have some support where you didn't have some support. And you can help explain yourself to other people. I usually go up to the normal person on the street and you say, "Hi, I'm genderqueer." They're not going to understand what you're talking about, so you still have to explain some things, but it's helpful. Whenever I first found out about genderqueer, it was like angels were singing or something. It was like coming home, finding out that, you're not alone, and this explains everything. It's just such a great feeling. But if you don't find that any of these labels do that for you, don't use them. No one can define your gender identity but you. However, there are some words that you cannot use. There are certain labels that are just for certain groups of people, different communities, people who have had certain experiences, and people of certain cultures. For example, the T-slur. If you don't know what the T-slur is, it's tranny. And we hear that a lot in our culture. You hear it on RuPaul's Drag Race, you hear it on just different television shows where they say a tranny hot mess, different things like that. Horrible word, I don't even like using it in this video, but the only people who can use that word and it not be offensive is trans women or other DMAB trans people, because that word was used towards them originally. It was a way to put them down. Our culture is more accepting towards people that they perceive as female, DFAB people, dressing more masculinely. Because who wouldn't want to be a man? Our culture is very male-friendly. But if someone that our culture identifies as male, DMAB people, dress like a woman, why would you want to be a woman? That's a horrible thing. So they got called slurs. They suffer more violence. They are more likely to be abused, more likely to end up in jail for defending themselves, and more likely to have the T-slur used against them. So only they can reclaim it. If you're a defab trans person, do not use it. If you're a cis person, do not use it. Just don't do it. It's only for them. Similarly, the word ladyboys. Again, it's a slur. Don't like using it in the video. I'm going to have to put a warning that there are slurs in this video. But this is mostly was used against Asian DMAB people. So again, don't use it unless it has been used against you, pretty much, is the general rule. Same as queer. Don't use the word queer unless it's been used against you, or it has been used against people like you. Like, I've been called dyke before, and I've been gay bashed because of my gender identity and because of my sexuality, because a lot of people view those as the same thing. So I'm allowed to use the word queer because it's been used against me. But someone who has not had their gender identity and their sexuality used against them in a violent way cannot necessarily use those words. So then we come to words that have cultural meaning. You see, although transgender identities and third gender identities may be new to most of the Western society, relatively new within the last 100 years, this is old hat to a lot of other countries and cultures. Most cultures had a word for transgender people or had more than 2 genders. It's a very old thing. You cannot use the words from those cultures unless you're part of that culture, because you have no clue how that culture treats those people. You have no clue what those people have been through, what they go through on a daily basis, what their life is like. You can research all you want, but you'll never know because you're not in that culture. You're not that race. You're not, there. So, what are some of these words that you can't use unless you're part of that culture? The most common one that we hear a lot online is Two-Spirit, and that's Native American and indigenous peoples of the Americas. They can use it, we can't. There's also Bakla, which is from the Philippines, Hijra, which is India, Fafafini, which is Samoan. Many cultures have third gender or transgender identities. You can't use those unless you're part of the gender. There are some more ambiguous words where I can't find, a set who can use these, who can't, but ones that you may not want to use. There's queen, which a lot of gay men use. I personally think that only DMAB people should use them if they're any kind of queer, especially if they're, of course, into drag queen, of course can be called a queen, just like drag kings, people who are a DFAB, who present themselves as male for a performance. They can call themselves kings. Queen, there's faux queens, which I think is really weird. DFAB people who dress like drag queens. Again, DMAB trans people and people who are DMAB and present in a more feminine way, they get more violence towards them, so I don't really like that. Other words, butch and femme. You hear these in a lot of different communities. The trans community, you might have a femme trans man, which is a DFAB person who identifies as male or masculine, but presents in a more feminine way. You also have butch trans women, DMAB person who identifies as female but presents in a more masculine way. And these different identities get a lot of flack, even within the transgender community. They're like, oh, well, you're not really transgender because you pass as cis, or whatever. And that's not cool. You can also use it in queer communities, especially lesbian communities. Butch is the more masculine lesbian, femme being the more feminine lesbian. I don't think that it's really something that you can use as a cisgender straight person. You can just say, hey, I'm feminine, or I'm a tomboy, or hey, I'm masculine, or I am metrosexual, you know, because it's more okay if cis people do it, although it's definitely in some cultures and some parts of even the United States not really a good thing to some people. The point is, when we're talking about gender, embrace how you feel, don't judge other people, and don't judge yourself. If you're a man and you're not the epitome of masculinity, you don't have, you don't use power tools, you don't wear denim, whatever, that's okay. Don't worry. And don't worry if someone that you see as a man is wearing a dress or makeup or painting their nails or anything that's feminine. And definitely don't judge a person for not being cisgender and for being transgender. And the same for female. It's great if you're totally feminine and you want to be a 50s housewife and you want to have 2.5 children and you want to sew and cook and whatever. That's fine. It's a great thing. But don't judge other people for not wanting that. And also, don't judge queer people for being feminine or being masculine. Like me, I can cook, I clean, I take care of the house, I sew. That doesn't make me a woman. I'm still genderqueer. It doesn't make my identity less because I go to certain gender roles of a female. And the same for female trans people. Point is, gender wibbly wobbly. There's no way to hammer it down, so don't put people into boxes. Don't try to make everything neat and nice, because it's not going to happen. Just be yourself and let other people be themselves too. Thank you for listening to my super long, not really sensical video. I'll have another one up on other things soon. Thank you for listening. Bye.